66 of At Your Service with Haber and Martinez. Today's episode is entitled The Many Marvels of the 11th Judicial Circuit, and we are very excited and happy and pleased to have our special guest with us, Chief Judge Nushin Sayfie. As you know, I'm Haber, Martinez is below me, and Judge Sayfie is off to my left screen. Just by way of brief introduction, Judge Sayfie is our Chief Judge here in the 11th Judicial Circuit. We are the biggest circuit in the state of Florida. We are also the fourth largest judicial circuit in the entire country. We have 123 judges here in Dade County, and Judge Sayfie sits on top of all of them, so to speak, in terms of her administrative role. Judge Sayfie wasn't always a judge, nor was she always a chief judge. She was a public defender here in Miami-Dade County. She also spent a couple years in Leon County as a PD. And she's been a judge now on her fourth term, I believe, serving her fourth term. Third or fourth, I'm not sure. But it's been an awful long time. You wouldn't know it from looking at her, but she's extremely experienced and just incredibly qualified to do the job that she's been appointed by her peers to do. So without wasting a whole lot of time and spending a whole lot more, feel free to read more on her bio on our promo materials. But let me thank you very much for taking time out of your busy Monday, Judge, to join us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's an honor.
It's our great pleasure. And I was hoping that maybe we could start the show by you just explaining to the folks a little bit about what it is that you do as an administrative judge. I think most people think, when they hear the word judge, they figure it's somebody in a black robe banging a gavel and either objecting or sustaining or overruling objections. But that's not really what you do anymore, although you did start that way. So take us on a journey of the judicial history of Judge Sayfie.
So I was appointed to the bench by Governor Christ back in 2007, and I started in the dependency division, and I moved over to the criminal division, where I got to see both of you pretty regularly and go back to my roots as a public defender. And I was there for about 12 years. And 8.5 of those years, I was the administrative judge of the division. I was still in court almost every day, but I had the administrative duties of that division, which is our largest division here in Dade County. And then when Chief Judge Soto was termed out as chief, I followed in her footsteps again and became chief judge. And I'm about to start my second term as chief this summer. Because Miami is so large, the job of chief judge is largely almost entirely administrative. So compared to chiefs in smaller jurisdictions, those chiefs usually carry a docket. I have a small docket of some cases that I've carried from when I was in my former assignment. But for the most part, what I do now is if I'm in court, it's usually because I'm covering for somebody who's out. I'm covering where there's a need. We're currently down 5 judges right now awaiting appointment from the governor's office. So we have a lot, there's always, work to be done. And so I try to tag in where I can be of use. But you're right that I do not judge that often these days with the robe. I'm usually judging like this from a Zoom meeting or in these days, actually a lot of in-person meetings as well. But the predominantly what I do all day, every day is administrative.
So what's it like to sit in the administrative capacity? I mean, I know as a sitting judge who does trials, you're intimate with the community all the time. You're dealing with jurors, you're dealing with lawyers, bailiffs, people in the courtroom, pro se defendants, all sorts of fun stuff. But in the administrative capacity, it's got to be a little more tedious, I would assume.
I think so. I mean, I think, most days it's a good day, and I really appreciate the opportunity that I'm getting and the exposure. I get to interact with sort of the inner workings of our court system. So we have, because we're so large, we have 123 judges, but we have another 600 employees that support all the work that the judges do. So I spend a lot of my time working with all those amazing employees for the administrative office of the courts that help us do the work of justice. And so there's a lot of that. Sometimes there's work with either interacting with the county or at the state level, dealing with budget issues. I had a meeting today with all the chief judges from across the state of Florida. So there's issues statewide, there's certainly issues locally, and then there's issues, in-house. And I get to do a little bit of national work now too, which is great, to interact with judges and other justice partners from across the country and see what they're doing and teach them about what we're doing here. The good news is we're still sort of at the forefront of a lot. here in Miami. And thanks to all the people that certainly came before me, the judges and prosecutors and public defenders and court administrators and law enforcement. We have a really great history of collaboration in this county, and we are at the forefront of a lot of innovation and just forward thinking. And then we've been ahead of the game for 50 years that I can say.
Well, I guess a really good example of that might be what you helped launch in terms of mental health and veterans court, right?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk a little about that, because we have, I think a lot of people don't understand. When I say people, I mean people who are not in the legal profession. Hopefully folks who are listening who don't really understand how the court system impacts the community. They think above and beyond, well, somebody gets arrested and the court system deals with them, or somebody has a landlord-tenant complaint and the court system deals with it. But the court actually reaches out and touches the community in so many different ways. And I think one of the things that we can thank you and some of your colleagues for, guys like Steve Leifman and others who have just been, so absolutely laser focused and committed to doing things to help certain segments of the community that don't know that there's stuff out there for them, that you guys are really thinking about them and ways to help them.
So I think it's definitely our goal is to help the people who come before us. But by doing that, I really think we're helping the community at large, right? Like we're helping people who are in court not come back to court for various reasons. And I think when you're referring to vet court or mental health diversion court, which I served in for over 10 years, our drug court, which is the nation's first drug court, these are what we kind of now refer to as problem-solving courts. But honestly, the way I look at it is anytime people are coming to a courtroom, by and large, it's because they have a problem. And so if there's anything that we can address in the courtroom setting, then that's what we should be doing. So we've actually extended what I consider to be sort of problem-solving courts. The idea to landlord-tenant, it was one of the one things you brought up. We're trying to help with debt collection. So we're doing a lot of different things, and we're lucky too that we can tap into sort of nationwide resources to help us, and grants and whatnot, so that we can help the community, be safer, be better, and we can help people who are in court not return to court. Specifically, the problem-solving courts you're referring to, those are geared towards people who have addiction issues or mental health issues. And again, the idea is that you're in the criminal justice system, and there is a traditional model where it's about proving guilt and then ultimately punishment. Our goal is to kind of, stop that cycle and stop people from returning to court under those circumstances. And we've been really successful. And again, the first one we had was adult drug court, which started over 50 years ago. We were the first drug court in the country. And then thanks to Judge Leifman, we have all of our mental health courts that really started with him. But I presided in the felony mental health court. And then Veterans Court was sort of a natural offshoot of that, which we were lucky to do that under the auspices of a grant that we got through the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. And that's been a really successful court as well. I could talk about our problem-solving courts for days.
I have a question for you, Judge. Sure. I'm very more familiar with, obviously, the drug court, because I was in narcotics when I was at the state attorney's office, and the narcotics unit handled part of the drug court and the mental health court. Do we know? I know both are very successful. I know from just being part of it how successful it is. But do you have any numbers on recidivism? And for those who don't, or the layman out there, recidivism is people that come back into the criminal justice system. And I know that when I was doing narcotics, we saw a lot of people that didn't come back, that they actually got help, they got better, and they never came back into the criminal justice system. And that was the goal, obviously. Do you know the numbers?
I don't have the numbers offhand. We have to collect them pretty regularly because so many of those courts have some funding or some staffing that's provided by grants. So I can definitely get that for you, so you can provide it to your listeners later on. But I can tell you it's a really low recidivism rate. The vast majority of people, especially in both of those courts, they get their case dismissed if they don't have a significant history. So we're lucky that a lot of those people are sort of one and done. And then what we try to focus our most of our attention on and most of our resources on are the people that are really what I would call sort of the frequent flyers. And our goal is to interrupt that. And so right. That is really so we're following, honestly, it's the science. We have doctors that advise us, and we follow the science because regular judges and lawyers, we don't know science. We know what we do, but we have to recognize that you really need to be more involved and more on top of the people that need it. And being too much on top of people that don't need it can actually have the opposite effect, where you're actually causing them to have hardship and causing them to really be high utilizers when they wouldn't be otherwise.
But these programs are good, and I think, I just want the audience to understand something. These, having been part of it, have clients there, been a prosecutor, they're good because a lot of these people that get arrested that have either a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue, and the substance abuse issue could be from a mental health problem.
Often both.
They don't know that they're having these issues because of their mental health, especially the mental health. The drugs, people kind of get a feel that they're addicted and they stole because they needed money for drugs. And that kind of is intuitive. But a lot of the people with the mental health issues don't know it. They don't realize that the reason they've committed these crimes, or for example, lost control of their temper, or have impulse control issues and things, it's really a mental disorder. And when we get them help, they don't come back into the system, which means the community is safer.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, listen, public safety, I know public safety underlies everything that we do. Certainly as judges, certainly as a chief judge, our goal is always to make sure that the streets are safer and the community is better off.
And you work, so in doing that, you work with everybody, right? I mean, obviously you work with the state attorney's office, you work with the public defender's office, you work with the private bar. I would assume that there's input from all different angles and to some degree cooperation.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and I learned this during COVID, if I didn't already know it beforehand, everything that we do is a result of collaboration. And that's always been the culture of Miami. And one of the things that I always hear about from other judges and other justice partners that might come visit Miami from various parts of Florida or from other parts of the country is how well we collaborate here. Just this morning, I was greeting a group of various different, included judges, corrections officers, police officers from across the country for the National Center for State Courts. And again, they always comment on how well we collaborate. And even for this presentation, they have everybody, there was a judge there, there's going to be a prosecutor there, there's a public defender there, all of our Miami's best, telling them what we do here. But we can't do any of this stuff without collaboration. Certainly we need the leadership of the state attorney. And Catherine Fernandez-Rundle has really not just been at the forefront of a lot of this, but along the way, you don't just open a drug court and walk away. You don't open a mental health court and then walk away. You have to constantly be learning and looking at the science and seeing how you can do things better. So the one thing that I think is really important for leadership in our courts is that we have people who are willing to constantly look back at their practices and make sure they're doing the best they can for the people that have essentially put us in office. We want to do the best we can for our constituents. We want to do the best we can for this community. And that means constantly reevaluating what we do and seeing what we can do better.
It's funny because, a lot of people always think that it's just contention. Even other lawyers, I mean, I cross paths with a lot of civil attorneys that don't know anything about criminal. They refer cases or they're calling to ask questions or what have you. And they don't understand that it's not war necessarily. I mean, the trial may be war, but the rest of it it's camaraderie. And your former boss, Carlos Martinez, was on a couple of months ago, and it was really interesting because he had just come out of a budget meeting where he was actually with Ms. Rundle Fernandez, and the two of them were working together on budgeting issues with the legislature. And he expounded on that a lot, which was really interesting for me, because I'm always seeing the dichotomy, and the head-to-head, especially between PDs and ASAs. APDs.
I would say honestly, at that level, I think there's a lot more working together than there is working against each other. And just while we're here, I mean, Mr. Martinez and I were adversaries for years before, and we always got along well. So I think that there is definitely a level of professionalism that goes on in the justice system that you don't always see in the civil divisions. I've heard that from many civil practitioners that criminal is considered to be more sort of civil than civil is. But I will say that, and I think it's important. I mean, you have to conduct yourself and understand what the other person's role is, but then also understand that there are things that we're all united on. And I think especially when you're talking about trying to improve what's going on out there in the community, that is typically a collaborative effort. And I think, a recent example of that I can bring up is for the last decade or more, there have been efforts for us to improve our pretrial practices, meaning that when somebody gets arrested, what do we do, when we're considering release of this person? And that is something that was started before me by Chief Judge Soto. It was led largely by Commissioner Sally Heyman, who's one of our retired county commissioners. And Ms. Rundle, she had people from her office, we're in Judge Soto's office all the time. We were working on that for years and years and years. When I took over as admin and then ultimately as chief, we were able to get a grant right before COVID. And we were getting somewhere with that because it was all of us together at the table, including law enforcement, including led largely by corrections, because they're the ones that have to, use tax-paying dollars to pay for the people that are in jail. So again, we are always working together for that. And we're always working towards honestly keeping the streets safer. And I would say I would include Carlos Martinez in that. I mean, all of us have a role to do, but we're not sitting here thinking, we're always thinking about what's going to be best for the community when we're working at that level.
Just as a curiosity, I know that our governor just signed a new pretrial release bill into law. How, if any, if there's going to be any effect that you can envision, how's that going to change, if at all, the way our structure works today? Or is it basically going to be the same as it always was?
No, I mean, my hope is that it'll be better. And honestly, we were very happy that the governor actually put a call to lawmakers to address some of the main issues that we were dealing with. The biggest change that we were hoping to, we weren't going to be making change in the sense of law, right? We're judges. I am a judge, and I think it's important for everyone, your listeners, people who don't interact with the justice system, to understand that a judge's job is to follow the law. So, and a prosecutor's job is to ultimately do justice, but to, within the confines of the law. And the public defender's job, the defense attorney's job, is to, as you know, zealously represent their client, but also within the confines of the law. All of us operate within the confines of law, and none of us are lawmakers. We are essentially law followers. And so within the confines of existing law, we were all seeking together to improve our current practices, which currently allow for somebody to can get bail and can be released from jail on bail without ever seeing a judge. So, and that includes a lot of violent charges. So for example, somebody who's got a DUI manslaughter, someone who's got an aggravated battery that's not domestic, and that aggravated battery could be with a firearm, someone who's committed an attempted second-degree murder, somebody who's committed a burglary of a home. Those are all charges that right now, as we speak, there's a standard bond attached to it, and the person can bond out if they have enough money and not see a first appearance judge. That was probably the biggest thing that we were trying to address. And I think listen, there's been a lot of misinformation out there. I think it's important for people to understand that at no time was it ever the intention of anyone on this committee, certainly not the courts, to release people on violent offenses without seeing a first appearance judge. And unfortunately, like I said, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So, I welcome the opportunity. If anyone has wants more information, I'm glad to give it to them in black and white to show them. But the good news is that at least part of what the legislature passed seems to address that loophole. It's still too early for us to know the specifics, because as you know, I think the governor just signed that bill. I don't remember if it was last week or the week before. The legislative session just ended this past Friday. So we're all going to be taking a look at it, certainly locally, but I also have statewide meetings where we're kind of digest all this and see what it means for us.
As a defense lawyer, I mean, I've done hundreds and hundreds of attended, as a lawyer, hundreds and hundreds of bond hearings, felony bond hearings, misdemeanor bond hearings, domestic violence bond hearings. Judge Glazer, who's our 9 to 5 Monday through Friday bond judge, is just absolutely wonderful. I mean, I've seen many of them come and go over the years. She is my hands down favorite out of all of them, with due respect to the others. And every now and then you do wind up where you're on a holiday schedule or a weekend schedule, or Judge Glazer's on vacation, and you get another judge, maybe somebody who's new or somebody who's never been in the criminal arena before, and they have to sit in those bond hearings, and that can be a little arduous. But
by the way, just I don't mean to interrupt you, but that was another thing that we were working on too, right? Because we wanted there to be the judges, especially the judges that aren't Judge Glazer, that don't do that work all the time, need some guidance. And so part of what we were looking at too, right now, the bond is just attached to the crime, and there's no looking at the individual. And so part of what we were hoping to implement and now all that's on hold, was for a judge to be able to look and see more than that, right? Like to see the person's prior history, which if they get to the first appearance judge, then the judge can look at prior history. But if they bond out on that bond, then they wouldn't, the judge's, prior history isn't even seen. Also, what the science has taught us is that a history of failing to appear is a big indicator of somebody failing to appear again. And the goal of bond, the goal of release, is to make sure the person comes back to court.
So I also want to add one thing to that, because I think it's very important for the community to know this. Whether you are able to post bond or not, whether you have to go to an initial appearance bond hearing or not, at any point, according to the Florida rules of criminal procedure, at any point, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, or the court itself can request a review of bond. It's always reviewable. So if the state has reason to believe, because they find out something after the bond has been posted that raises concern, and they want a higher bond or to revoke bond or to have no bond, they can always bring it in front of the judge. They need 3 hours notice, and that's it.
Absolutely.
Same on the defense side. Let's say that bond in a particular case is, like, for example, basic trafficking case, right? Standard bond's $500,000. That's just by the books. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It doesn't matter if you're old, young, black, white, male, female. It's irrelevant who you are. The bond is the same. But if it's posted, it can always be readdressed afterwards. And if it's not posted or it can't be posted, it can always be readdressed. So that's one of the nice things that I've always thought about here in our local system. And I've been to other jurisdictions in the state of Florida where things don't flow as smooth or in my opinion, as reasonable and rational as they do here. I've always seen bond as a really intense situation that's given thought and consideration. And the only trouble I've ever had is, like I said, when we have a judge who just doesn't know what they're doing, and then you've got the lawyers sitting there trying to teach the judge, which is always uncomfortable.
So I'm going to say this. I think in all of our divisions, not just the criminal divisions, but all of our divisions, I think that we come from a culture of giving access. Our courts really, I think the lawyers have always demanded access, and the courts have always risen to the occasion and given access. And I'm really proud of that. I think that we give access much better than any courts that I hear about. And that's one of the things that I always hear about from lawyers. And I know that myself, when I went to Tallahassee, I was shocked that it was much tougher, even though we were all in the same building. It was so much tougher to get on the judge's calendar on any given day. Whereas here, we tend to, with 24 hours notice or less, you're going to be able, and sometimes even as an emergency, you walk into a courtroom, the judge is there, they're going to get the file pulled and they're going to try to help you out. And I think that's true of most of our courts. And I think it's important for everyone to know that.
Now, that's not a statewide rule. I mean, that's just the way that Miami-Dade County has done business.
Yeah, and I think that we've all I think those of us who work in the system, whether you're a judge or a lawyer or a clerk or corrections or, law enforcement officers, I think the one thing that we do really nicely here in Miami is we want to help people out, right? So you very rarely hear someone say to you, "Oh, that's not my job." What you're going to hear is, "I don't know the answer, but let me help you get the answer." And someone will direct you to a person who can get the answer. And so I think we are definitely, we have problem solving as sort of in our DNA. The good part of that is, it's just, there's a lot of good in that. The funny thing is that we don't always have like easy to follow procedures, because we tend to just, somebody walks in the door, we're going to help them out. So we have to know what we've done better. And I think especially since COVID and giving people remote access as well, is now we have people actually there to give out information in a sort of logical way. We're using our websites better. But I've always said, like, you could walk in the door of any of the courthouses and ask anyone who's in the lobby, and whatever they do for a living, they're going to stop and they're going to be able to help you and guide you to the right person who can get you the information you need.
When I was a young lawyer, and I mean, even still to some degree today, although I have to admit it's gotten a whole hell of a lot better. But when I was a young lawyer, it used to give me horrible trepidation to have to go north of County Line Road and enter the Broward County Courthouse for anything, because it was like night and day. Here in Miami, I started in 1991. We still had a pickle barrel back then. And it was a very fraternal place where everybody kind of congregated, and people from all different perspectives in the system had a very fraternal and open relationship in the morning, even if things got a little bit wild and later on in the day, right? But in the morning, everything was always smooth and ran really well. And you go up to Broward, and it was a completely different ballgame. There was no pickle barrel. There was no camaraderie. In fact, it was almost felt like the Wild West up there in comparison to Dade. Try getting a motion on calendar. Try getting called out of turn. They still do that up there, at least some of the judges, where they line the lawyers up in chairs, and you basically play musical chairs. The first lawyer gets up, and then everybody moves to the next chair and slides over. I mean, it's just a different cup of tea. So what we have here is truly special.
And can I say something? And I think this, and I only know from my experience, but since you've been working with other jurisdiction judges, you might have a better handle on this. I think the reason we all get along here so well, generally speaking, obviously there's individual personalities, but is the public defender's office and the state attorney's office, from the day I started anyway, worked very well together. We were like siblings with the same parent, right? We all have our own job, we all have our own lives, we all have our own thing to do, but we get along, and we understand that we have to get along. And I think that was brought upon by the people in charge, Janet Reno to start with before Kathy Fernandez-Rundle, and Bennett Brummer before Carlos Martinez. I think that's it. Do you find that, Judge? Do you think that could be why we get along, or do you have a better handle?
I mean, I think in the criminal justice system for sure, because remember, you've got the same lawyers that are assigned to the same judge for, an indefinite period of time. So day in, day out, you're dealing with the same people. And I think that, you end up becoming sort of familiar with each other, knowing each other, and you might be fighting today on this case, but then tomorrow you're going to work out another case. So there's I think the people, the personalities, as much as the criminal justice system is our biggest, and it's the biggest division we have, you've kind of got a smaller number of people that really, create that sort of familiar atmosphere. I think it's similar in all the divisions, but I think it's less so in the other divisions. But I think that it's definitely, I think Miami in general, because I noticed this during COVID with, when I was dealing with not just the criminal division, but all the divisions trying to get back in action. Hello, are you guys there?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't see you anymore. I just lost you.
Are you there?
Yeah, if you
We're here.
Can you see me still?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. I just lost you on my screen for whatever reason. All right, so we definitely had it. It was amazing to see people come together because their goal was to get the courts back online, and everyone was doing it and doing it really well. And I was amazed. I shouldn't even have been amazed because it was definitely had been my sort of experience from the time, my earliest days as a PD in 1994, but getting people together in the room, getting people together on a Zoom screen, you could do that at the top of all the different agencies, at the top of all the different voluntary bar organizations, at the top of all the law enforcement agencies. You can get people together here in a heartbeat, within minutes, within hours, you can get it done. And it's pretty amazing.
I think, Judge, your screen, Ed, I don't know if you're seeing what I'm seeing, but it looks like
it's frozen.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
But we can hear you.
We can hear you, but you're
okay. So give me a minute, and it's so funny. Of course, this never happens, but of course,
maybe toggle your video on and off, and that'll do it.
Is that better?
Oh yeah, now we got you back.
All right,
so
you're back.
I want to ask you a little bit about something that you just kind of touched on a little bit, which is technology and the website of the court.
There we go.
This has become a really big issue. And I will tell you right now that as a defense attorney, as a participant in the court system, Zoom has really been a wonderful thing. I mean, there was nothing better as a young lawyer than going and spending my mornings in the pickle barrel. But 31 years in, not so much. If I can avoid dealing with, the potential road rage and possibly being murdered or murdering somebody else on my way to court, it's better. On the flip side, sometimes we have to sit and wait an hour and 15 minutes on Zoom for the judge to call us, but that's the trade-off, right? And it's a very good one as far as I'm concerned. So I think, that's been a really nice thing from my perspective, and I can tell you some of my clients obviously appreciate it. For example, this morning I have a client who's up in Palm Beach County. He didn't have to drive down to court from Palm Beach County. He could appear by Zoom. Is that something we can expect to continue, or is this going to be phased out?
No, I mean, listen, I think the cat's out of the bag, and I think it's here to stay. And I think that statewide, I mean, you're going to see there's rules that are starting to get passed now and advanced by the Florida bar to address sort of what our permanent practices are going to be. I think I have mixed feelings about it. I'm going to tell you, because I see all the advantages, but I also am concerned because I don't worry about guys like you because you've already practiced law. You had a robust practice. So for you to go from in person to Zoom is easy, right? Like it was a little bit of a transition, but it's pretty easy. And I think for judges that are experienced, for lawyers that are experienced, it's not hard to go from, in real life to virtual. They can kind of make that transition. I guess the concern I have, and to the extent that there are lawyers, watching or tuning in, my worry about new lawyers and sort of new judges. How do we train the next generation to kind of keep that culture going and learn how to, there's an art to what we do. It's not just what we learn in the law books. You graduated from law school and you really don't know anything until you've practiced for a while. And that practice is largely based on the relationships you have. And whether it's, in the criminal division, in the civil division, in the family division, cultivating those relationships has typically been an in-person endeavor. And I think that's what I worry about a little bit. That being said, in terms of what I was talking about earlier, accessibility for lawyers and really accessibility for the people that we serve, we can't go back to the old days. In a place like Miami, where you just touched on, the road rage, we've got people who are working full time and don't have the flexibility to leave work, or have children and don't have the flexibility to drop them off at school any earlier than they can. And then they're going to be in their cars or on public transportation for God knows how long to get to the courthouse for traffic tickets. So for example, traffic, we pivoted to Zoom for traffic, and we've kept traffic 100% on Zoom. And if there needs to be an in-person hearing, if a person wants an in-person hearing, they can have one. But that's an area where for sure it's going to stay Zoom. But I think you're going to have, we have to kind of keep Zoom as an opportunity in all the divisions, because again, access for all of your clients, access for witnesses, access for police officers. For example, now law enforcement, they're doing all their depositions. We started doing them on Zoom during the pandemic, and post-pandemic, they're still doing them on Zoom. That way, law enforcement officers don't have to waste their time in their cars driving all the way downtown to go to a deposition. They can stay in their municipality, serve their constituents, serve the people that they're sworn to protect, and be able to do the deposition sometimes from their car, sometimes from an office, or sometimes from home, depending on where it is in their shift. But that's been a huge game changer too. And I could go on and on. There are lots of game changers.
I want to address one thing
to that. Let me tack on one thing to that real quick. It also saves the taxpayers a fortune, because those guys are getting travel time. They're getting OT if they're not on the clock. They're burning gas. They're doing, all of those things, the miles on the car, all of that doesn't have to be done is actually saving money by way of Zoom. And the other thing I want to say to that with regards to my own personal feelings are, there's, as you said, even on top of the learning curve and everything else, there's a lot of stuff that can't be done on Zoom. I would never appear on Zoom for an evidentiary hearing, and I would be very upset with a judge who would allow that to happen. That's got to be done in person. If you've got to cross-examine a witness in the criminal arena, and I don't know anything about civil law, so I don't speak to it. Ed does a little, he can. But in the criminal arena, if I have to cross-examine a witness, I am not doing that by Zoom. I need to be in that person's face. I need to see their body language. I need to feel their energy. I need to be able to tap into that and play off of it. And the only way I can do that is in person. You can't do that behind a camera.
So that you're absolutely right about that. So we're doing, I think evidentiary hearings by and large in all the divisions are in person. The only caveat I would say is, for example, when you've got vulnerable victims, right? You've got domestic violence situations, you've got child witnesses. Now we have a whole added way to have them have access to court, have them be access to being questioned if necessary, if they need to be questioned, without sort of the added trauma of bringing them to court, especially for hearings that short of a trial.
Right, because even in the older days, my last child abuse case, felony child abuse case, obviously the child had to testify. The child was not in the courtroom. The child was in the judge's chambers testifying by way of video, and the jury's watching it in the courtroom. And, you know, still the kid's got to be brought over. There's a guardian. There's a whole process that's going on there that affects that child.
Absolutely.
You know, right, wrong, or indifferent, the kid is getting a new trauma in the system. It's not an education when you're talking about a 6, 7, 8-year-old child.
No, I mean, now you have the ability of keeping them in a safe, you know, an environment where they feel safe and secure, and not having to, and just if nothing else, just transportation, being transported in the middle of your school day away and coming to court, and knowing that, you know, you might, you know, the people involved in the case are, you know, a hallway away. So I think the opportunities for stuff like that, you know, or we probably haven't even seen them all yet, but we're definitely going to keep that stuff going.
I think that as far as like the learning curve and the evidentiary hearings, what I have found and I like, let's start first with the evidentiary hearings, is I like that the judges allow it to the parties. If both parties stipulate that they want to do it by Zoom, and if it's in a criminal situation where you got to make sure you colloquy the defendant and he agrees to it, fine. I'm with Michael. I would never stipulate. But every judge knows that if I don't stipulate, but the other party does, let's say the state wants to, they're like, well, no, we're going to do it in person because one party doesn't stipulate. I get that. And as far as all the other stuff, Judge, we see it, but there's no different as far as like what happens on Zoom with lawyers, especially that are young and inexperienced, and they do things that either cause the court to reset the case or slow it down. It's a learning curve. It's just like when we first started encountering
different. The practice of laws, because look at I know, and I know the answer that both of you are going to give me, because we all kind of learned in the same place. When you're sitting in court and you're waiting for the judge to call your case, and you're sort of captive in there, especially because when I started, you know, we didn't have phones either, so you couldn't even be on your phone. You had no choice but to sit and watch. And you learn, even when it was a mundane motion to compel, you learn something by watching that lawyer in front of that judge. You learn what to do and you learn what not to do. And that's the part that, you know, and then you also cultivated relationships. When you're stuck in line with somebody, you know, for 25 minutes, you're going to actually get to know them and, you know, discuss a case or, you know, shoot the breeze. And lots of times you were shooting the breeze about, you know, the law. So
you're going to especially get to know the bailiff.
But they can still learn.
Yeah. But there's still, you know, that the whole, all the schmooze that goes on in a courtroom that helps you help your client, right? Like you have to know who the clerks are. You have to know, you know, you have to know how the sausage is made to some extent. I think that part is lost. That being said, I think the practice is right now we're in a period of transition. It's turning into something that we, you know, that's different than what was around when we first started. And I think we have to leave it, I guess, to this, you know, leave it to the technology and leave it to the next generation to sort of figure out where it's all going to end up.
If I could jump in.
Sure.
They can still do that on Zoom. The smart ones will sit around and watch.
It's different though. I agree.
When we started, I remember when I started, there were ASAs who would leave the courthouse the minute calendar was done. Some of us wouldn't, right? Some of us, when we just started, we would walk into somebody else's courtroom to see what was going on. If there was a trial in the building, we'd walk into the trial and listen. They could still do that.
But and the other one in line the same way. I mean, waiting in line, you're captive. You have no choice but to sit and learn. That's the difference.
This brings me to my second point. Don't ruin my practice. Don't be ruining my practice on this show here now.
No.
If these young lawyers are not smart enough to realize that you've got to cultivate relationships, not because anybody's going to do anything unethical, but if a prosecutor doesn't know who I am, has never seen me before in my life, and they don't really understand a certain aspect of the law, and I say, listen, guys, under the law, this, that, or the other, you don't have a case. You can't prove this is going to be dismissed if I file a motion. They don't know who I am. So the reason we cultivated these relationships is because after a while that they know that I would never lie to them and that I would tell them something. They say, okay, well, you know what? I know Martinez. Let me go double check what he's telling me. But if he's saying it, there's something to it. That comes from what you said, the relationships we've cultivated over the years. And if the younger lawyers don't want to do that, then they're just not hurting. They're not helping themselves. So we, Michael and I, get benefit from that because our reputation with our clients precedes itself. And they say things like, hire Martinez, hire Haber. I don't know what they do, but somehow the prosecutors listen to them. Well, it's relationships that we cultivate.
There was nothing like standing in line and just listening to guys like Cy Gare go off and Ted Mastos go off. And I mean, it really was. It was an education you could not buy in law school. You just simply.
And there's that equivalent in all the divisions. There's that equivalent in our family division. There's that equivalent in the juvenile divisions. There's that equivalent in the civil divisions. I've heard it from all lawyers across the board that, there's none of them want to come in for the 5-minute motion calendar. I get that. They're not wrong. It should stay on Zoom, but they all recognize how much they learned as young lawyers being sort of trapped in court during the 5-minute motion calendar.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the other divisions, because Ed and I know Ed does a little bit of civil work and he's got a little more experience, and obviously I've dabbled here and there, but you're in charge of all of it, right? And we have I think 6 different divisions in the circuit arena. You've got
8.
8?
8 if I'm answering sort of just 8 across. Yes, we have. In circuit court, we have 5 divisions, and in county court, we have 3 divisions.
Okay, so that's my bad.
Yeah.
So the general jurisdiction civil division, you've got a bunch of judges in there that do what?
In the general jurisdiction civil, what do they do?
Yeah, just
so we have circuit and we have county, and circuit civil is for typically the bright line is $50,000 now. Those jurisdictional amounts change. So if the suit in question is for $50,000 or more, it's in circuit court. If it's less than $50,000, it's in county court.
So, but in circuit civil, you'll have stuff like personal injury cases.
Well, you'll have that in both places now. So yeah, I mean, you'll have certain causes of action in both. It just depends on what the amount of money is. But we had so it's interesting, and I'm glad you brought this up, because honestly, the biggest challenge I've had as chief, one of the biggest challenges, frankly, has been dealing with not just the civil division, but the county civil division, because they have just been inundated with cases and with filings more than any other division
Really?
by, I can't even tell you by how much, by tons. Like the caseloads overall have been manageable for the last few years. Caseloads in county civil, way, like a 65% jump from before COVID, before pre-COVID numbers. And then the governor signed pretty sweeping tort reform about maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. And leading into that change, the lawyers across the state of Florida knew that was coming. And we had what we call the surge. I joke now, like, everyone hears surge and they think COVID numbers. I'm like, no, to me, the surge was a civil caseload. So our county civil division took in 60,000 filings in the month of March.
I know some lawyers who filed close to 100 alone, them alone.
Yeah.
They basically filed everything they had that they were trying to
going on.
I sat through a CLE about 2 weeks ago with Judge Peter Lopez. And that was one of the questions that it was the Miami Beach Bar Association that had put it on. So it was primarily a civil, discussion about civil court. Of course, Judge Lopez sat in criminal for a long time. He's been in civil for a while now. And he was saying that was one of the questions that one of the panelists asked him about, what he thought from the judicial perspective of lawyers filing to hit that deadline before the new law kicks in. Apparently, I mean, again, it's out of my ballywhack, but apparently one of the issues was, seeking legal fees, and that there may be some change to that with the new law or what have you.
There was a big change, I think, in attorneys' fees with the PIP statute. Look, I hate to say it. I mean, we can all sit there and, look from afar and say what somebody should or shouldn't do. I think at the time, there wasn't a lot of time to think. So I think the attorneys did what they had to do.
That's what Judge Lopez said.
Yeah, I mean, they had to get these cases in for their clients, and, it is what it is. And I think, listen, attorneys, we don't always, when attorneys are working, it's not always, you're not doing it for popularity, right? You're doing it because you've got a client, and you got to do the best you can for your client. And I think that's what the attorneys did under those circumstances, would get those cases under the wire. And listen, they can always voluntarily dismiss them later on. They're going to, a lot of them are going to get settled. A lot of them probably won't see the light of day, but it was important to get them in when they got them in.
So we've got civil, we've got criminal. Let's talk about family and unified children's and probate.
So lots of changes around there too. So family, the big changes that I've seen in family have been really around case management and time standards. And Samantha Ruiz-Cohen is the administrative judge there, and she's just took over when I became chief. She became the lead judge over there in the family division. She's done a phenomenal job. And those judges work really hard. And I'll tell you guys, because you're criminal practitioners, the worst of the worst clients you ever saw in criminal pale in comparison to some of the difficulties that I've seen and the challenges. And I get it. I mean, these are people who are talk about bad days. They're going through, fights involving kids and whatnot. So it gets to be very, very personal. But it's really, they have challenges there in terms of some of that stuff that I never even saw. Like I thought, you can have somebody in court and they could be charged with murder and they, for the most part, act very respectfully and with dignity in the courtroom. And they have pretty significant challenges with that in family court. But again, I'd say the big changes there really have to do with just case management and using technology. Everywhere we are in Miami, it's about using technology to sort of improve what we're doing and using data to improve what we're doing. And that's what the big pushes are there. Before I get to juvenile, I guess probate, similar. A lot of it has to do with case management. I've learned a lot about probate in my last year and a half. And that's where Chief Judge Soto is now, and she's enjoying it over there. But probate.
Well, that's like the Mediterranean for judges here in Dade County.
It used to be. I would say that you're right. It used to be where you went and then you retired. You went off into the sunset from there. Now it's a little bit. Judge Kolodny is the admin judge there, and she's younger than I am and been on the bench a little bit less than me. So that's she changed the complexion, I guess, of probate. But again, we have an aging population here in Florida, really across the country, and that's been a big challenge. So we added a judge to probate right as I took over as chief. We had to give them an extra judge. We had to give them an extra general magistrate, just because the caseloads there are so much higher, just because the population is living longer. There's a lot of challenges there as well, and they're with case management and whatnot. And again, just kind of dealing with the changes in the population and the demands. And we have so much more dementia in our community now, and there's just a lot of those things that you kind of know about from your personal life or your life with friends, and it comes to life sort of in the probate division. And then the last thing is you're asking about juvenile.
I can tell you I'm doing family and I do probate. Right. I can tell you that the two clients civil are in probate and family.
Well, sorry, I wanted the people to know a little bit about what those divisions do in terms of, family law. The family court system is, many people think it's just divorce cases, but it isn't, right? There's more to it.
They do divorces, they do adoptions, they do, custody issues there. So family is anything really to do with, I would say, marriage and kids. That's not dependency court.
Dependency, you sat in dependency for a while.
I sat in dependency for almost 2 years. Dependency court is typically, think of it as sort of DCF is represents the state on all the cases there. If there's an allegation that a child has been abused, neglected, or abandoned, that's how a case kind of hits dependency court. So that's really it's a pretty profound difference, but that's the big difference. There's a lot of overlap between dependency and family, and that's why this is a long story, but that's why we refer to the juvenile division now. It's no longer called the juvenile division. It's called the Unified Children's Court, and UCC we refer to it. And so there's
they got their own big, beautiful building.
And yeah, it's a beautiful courthouse. And it's appropriate because when I started, we were still on 27th Avenue. And while I felt very at home there, it was really not an ideal place to bring young kids in every day.
At least on the other hand, you weren't stuck in the trailers.
I was not.
The state attorneys had it a lot worse at 27th.
No, honestly, when I started as a PD in the juvenile division, and I thought I was living large over there on 27th Avenue. I didn't realize that, it wasn't. I had an office of my own, and I was so happy to be doing what I was doing.
That's where I cut my teeth. That's where I cut my teeth as court-appointed counsel, starting in juvenile delinquency and dependency. Yeah. Sandy Rockowitz was he was the guy who I followed around that building.
I remember him.
He was like the guru there.
Yeah.
But there were great judges over in that little 27th Avenue nook. And they certainly paid their dues and got themselves a great building, which leads to my question of when are we getting a building, Judge? When is criminal sitting there right now getting asbestos poisoning on the second
floor? The good news is, and I just had a budget meeting last week with the county, there's definitely a lot of money earmarked to bringing REG, kind of up to speed, I would say. And so that's going to get done. They have no choice, but they have to bring it, within codes, and they're going to finally take out all the crazy, 1970s ceilings and fluorescent lights. And there's going to be a nice overhaul of the building. Floors are going to get changed out, things like that. I don't know that there's going to be a new building. I will say this, there's always plans for a new building. I've been a judge long enough, and I was an admin long enough to be part of two, what do they call them? They basically do like a needs, they put together a master plan for the system. And so the criminal master plan, they do it, I want to say every 7 or 8 years, the county pays for this to get done. And I cracked up because I was part of the master plan in 2016. And then they were showing me all the stuff from the master plan in 2008. And I'm like, none of this got done. And needless to say, none of the stuff from the 2016 plan's gotten done yet either. But there are definitely, the good news is, first and foremost, I think the good news is we're already underway in getting a new criminal justice information system. So new CJIS is already underway, and that'll be hopefully fully, we'll be fully in the middle of it all in 2025. So from the standpoint of paper files, there will be no more paper files, sooner than later. But the building itself is going to get an overhaul in terms of whether it's going to be, there's ever going to be a new criminal courthouse. That's, way above my pay grade.
Well, I know that we're the biggest, but, Palm Beach is not a tiny county and Broward's not a tiny county. They're pretty populous and their court systems are pretty large too. I would say we're probably the 3 biggest maybe in the state. I could be wrong on that.
I don't remember. Yeah. I mean, but I will tell you that we're the only, they have what they call small, medium, and large jurisdictions. We are an extra large jurisdiction. We are the only extra large jurisdiction.
No, I'm not meaning,
it's hard to compare us to anyone, really.
I'm not meaning to say they're as big as us, but they're still big. I mean, they're not, forgive my term, but they're not podunk little counties.
No.
They're very populous.
Right.
And, Palm Beach has this beautiful court, facility overlooking the world. I mean, you feel like you went to that beautiful tower in Norway or something. And Broward has this hodgepodge. I mean, I don't even know what the people up there are thinking. They just keep adding to the building from like 1920. There's another wing and another wing and another wing, and you don't even know where to enter anymore or where to park because it's this convoluted facility with hallways that just keep going everywhere. And here in Miami, we have all of these different courthouses. So we've got, you've got family over in the Lawson Center. You've got the new juvenile courthouse. You've got the criminal building. I don't even know if 73 West Flagler is still open.
So if you come downtown, 73 West Flagler, I can look at it right now and see it. It's there. But right adjacent to 73 West Flagler, we have almost the entire structure. I think they're building floor 26 right now as we speak, and it's going to be a total of 28 stories. So the new civil courthouse will be done in 2024.
Probate's in another building, right? That's in one of those.
Probate's in 73. Probate, the new courthouse is referred to right now. I don't know what the name is going to be, but it's right now it's referred to as a civil and probate courthouse. So in the new courthouse, we will have civil, county and circuit civil, and we'll have probate over there.
And then, of course, all of the satellite buildings will still remain open.
Yes. And honestly, the satellites, just for people out there, again, to the extent that they're not law enforcement, but they're utilizers of the court system. The reason we have our branch courts, we have one in the South Dade, North Dade, Hialeah, Caleb, and Coral Gables, is to give access. Sorry?
Is Miami Beach still open? Or
and the beach, I'm sorry, and the beach as well. So that's what, six of them. It's because we're, trying to give access to people across the county. That's, this is such a big county. And more than that, it's the traffic, right? It's actually as big as the county is. I always say it's not that when there's no traffic, you forget how small. Like you can get from place to place pretty easily when there's no traffic. But, traffic kills us here. So it's good to have people have clerk's offices and court presence all over the county.
I don't know who's responsible for assignment, but I don't know.
I want to just quickly going back to the Zoom issue. That the other reason why I think Zoom is good here in Broward, and in Dade, and I can say that because I practice family and I do probate and I do civil. If all of the courtrooms were in one building, I might have a hearing in family court and another one in criminal. I could go to the building and handle it. But here in Dade County, if I have one in family and I have to be in person over there, but have something in criminal over here, I have to either have somebody cover for me or call the JA and tell the judge, please pass it for me. I'm sorry, I'm on my way. And if there's traffic, whereas with the Zoom, at least in Dade County, I could just log on off of one and log right onto the other one.
when you were a young lawyer, Ed, and you were working for the government, you didn't have that problem. But I was a private lawyer.
No,
I had to be in criminal in the morning. I had to be in juvenile in the morning. I had to be in branch court.
it's a
And,
nightmare.
well, it was done. We just did it. We
You did
went
it.
from place to place. The
Yeah,
judge
I get
all
it.
understood. You know, it was never a problem. But whoever it is that's responsible, and I'm assuming it's somebody in the clerk's office, but whoever it is that's responsible for assigning cases to the satellite courthouses does a brilliant job of it. They really do. They get it right. So South Dade, like if you get a ticket on Old Cutler, it's going to the South Dade courthouse. If you
Well,
get
that's part of the reason why we're trying to keep those on Zoom now, right? Because what if you just happen to be driving in Homestead, but you live in North Dade, and now when your ticket comes due, you're going to have to go drive all the way back down.
So as a practitioner, how we would handle those is we maintain a network of lawyers that do coverage, right? So especially with traffic, it's really easy because the stakes, look, I don't want to say any case is not important, but the stakes on your basic traffic infraction are low enough that you can you afford to have a coverage attorney handle it, as opposed to, let's say, you know, a major felony case that you're handling, or a dissolution proceeding or something along those lines.
So that actually is interesting too, because part of the existence of those branches, county civil cases get filed in the branches as well. And that's going to be changing soon, where we're going to be doing blind filing just to even out the caseloads. But up until now, so for the rhyme and reason of the traffic tickets is jurisdictionally, right? Like the police officer gave you a ticket in this area, then the ticket's going to remain in that area. So it's based on where you got the ticket. So for our county civil cases, there was no sort of, for landlord tenant, yes, like there's some categories of cases where it's really just to be for the convenience of the litigants. But for the vast majority of cases, it's kind of just where the lawyers choose to file them. So you have some of the branch courts where the caseloads are like 5,000 cases higher than some of the other branches. So we're trying to work on figuring that, piece of the puzzle out now with the civil attorneys.
How about the tech issues with regards to the administrative website for the 11th Judicial Circuit? I've noticed as a lawyer, it's pretty easy to navigate, but I can't speak as to a civilian who doesn't know. So
I think it's getting better. I have to give huge kudos to our IT folks and Eunice Sigler, who's our public information officer. And really during COVID, we really, I think, brought the website. It's still, listen, in a perfect world, I would be able to hire somebody whose entire job would be to maintain the website. I can't do that. We don't have the budget for that. But given who we have running it, they've done a really good job of improving it. And now, actually, when you go on the website, immediately the
little chat.
Yes, we have a chat bot now. Her name is Sandy, and Sandy is there to help you. And Sandy is, I know AI has there are people who either love AI or they have mixed feelings about it, given some of the stuff we've seen in the press. But Sandy is AI, and she's getting smarter. So the more questions she gets asked, the better she does. So even in the time, we've had her about 6 months or so, and she's getting smarter.
I'm good with AI until they try to kill me.
I don't think she's going to do that. I don't think she's. But yeah, so far. And so we're really, the website, we want it to be easy, obviously, for lawyers, but we want it to be easy for our community to use too, and for jurors, for anyone who's going to be touching the system in any way.
I don't mean to cut you off, but we're running low on time, and that's a topic I skipped, and I think it's probably the most important topic we're going to cover, and that is jurors. There's nothing more nerve-wracking to citizens than getting that jury notice. And obviously they have criminal or civil, and I know you guys have done some really great advancements with regards to how jury service is working. Can you give us a little on that?
Sure. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to all the people out there who have served on a jury before. And I want to also say, those of you who haven't, don't be scared. Every time I actually interact with jurors, which is one of my favorite things to do as a judge, I always joke about, why is there such bad PR for jury duty? Because when you actually have a juror go through it, they 99% of the time have a positive experience going through the process. I think it's probably one of the most patriotic things you can do, short of, voting, short of serving in the military. It really is. It's one of the few things that your community asks of you. So kudos to Harvey Rubin and to Louis Montaldo, who took over for Harvey after Harvey passed. They've instituted a new jury system where it's all automated and online. That's made things much, much easier. And that was great because that was implemented before COVID. So it made the whole process of dealing with jurors during COVID much easier. One of the things we started doing was having what we call a direct reporting system. So rather than jurors coming to court and being corralled in the big jury pool room, that's still happening, but we would additionally have jurors come straight to a courtroom. So if a judge knew they were for sure going to trial and it was going to be, a juror intensive case, meaning you're going to need a lot of jurors, they would sort of summon separately like 50 jurors just to go directly to that judge's courtroom. And we still do a little bit of that in both REG and 73 West Flagler. So we're doing everything we can. I mean, I just want jurors to understand as much as possible. We truly are doing everything we can to make it as good an experience as we can, given what our confines are. At the end of the day, this is Miami. At the end of the day, these are our buildings. At the end of the day, we have a very, the budget. I'm not operating with a budget that's endless. And we do everything we can to make it as positive as possible within those limitations. But I think I've got to give, again, kudos to the clerk's office and to the judiciary. We've really been doing everything we can to improve on the experience and to give jurors an opportunity to let us know what could be better. And I know a lot of them say what could be better is just not serving. But I think once they actually get here and serve or hear the speech from the judge, they realize that this is the system. I mean, I will say to jurors, like, how many of you ever complained about the system before? And they all, raise their hands and they complain about the system. I said, this is your role in the system, whether you're going to either voting or coming to jury duty. This is your place where you're going to be interacting as part of the system. So you can't complain about it and then opt out. Like you have to be, active in it. And I would say this again, and I think I would be curious, I'm sure the two of you agree, after all the jury trials you both have done. And I'm counting not just jury trials I did as a lawyer, but also the ones that I conducted as a judge. They were always no matter what happened, they weren't always happy because it's not an easy experience, but they were always positive generally about the experience.
Yeah, I agree. With
well, I think this has been a wonderful chat. I really think that you're doing a fabulous job. I couldn't be happier and prouder to have you as our chief judge.
Thank you.
I don't know if you're gonna. You have 5 more years on this term?
On my chief term or my judge term?
Your judge term.
It gets confusing. Yeah, my judge term, I was up in the last cycle, so I just started my most recent term started January 2023. So I'm 4 months in. 5 months in?
However long you decide to stay, it will be to the benefit of our community. You're a wonderful judge. You are a great public defender, and we really appreciate your service and what you're doing now. I know it's not easy. It's not easy doing any job. It's not easy being a judge, but at least when you run your calendar in division, it's like you have your little home, your little palace, your little thing. You now have this big administrative role, and I know the pressure on you must be very difficult. And so I want you to know that Ed and I and everybody we know really appreciate you. We're thankful for you. We're grateful for you, not just for coming on the show, but for doing the job you do.
Well, let me say thank you to both of you, not just for inviting me on the show, but just for, for years and years of friendship as well. And you've been part of that great collaboration that makes me love Miami so much. But I also want to say thank you for doing this, because I think it's so important any way we can to reach the public. And you've given me an opportunity to reach the public in a way that's within the confines of my restrictions as a judge, but also, we're out there every which way we can to make sure people have good information. And I really want people to have accurate, good information about the court system, about the law, about, I want them to feel good about what's going on there. And unfortunately, in this day and age, we get information every which way. It's important to have good, accurate information. I appreciate the two of you being a vehicle for that.
It's our great pleasure. With that, let me wrap up our show today and thank you again for coming and joining us and taking time out of your schedule. I want to remind the folks that we're here always at your service. I do not believe we're going to have a show next week, but we'll chime in on that later on. And if not, we'll see you in 2 weeks for episode number 67. Judge,
that's right.
Very much again for your time.
Thank you.
Good
I will be much more animated come the end of July, I hope. I'll be back to my normal self.
And just so the folks know, we'll be publishing this show up onto YouTube and various social media platforms as soon as it ends.
Right.
Thank you all very much. Judge, have a great afternoon.
Thank you.